Yeah.
I thought the ladies group was a upstairs meeting.
No, they won't climb stairs.
Yeah, I'd have to crawl up them.
All right. Well, I tried to call my bride 3 times, and every time Stella answered the phone and hung up.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
I could just hear Stella. My mom says, you know, she's doing something else.
hey!
The door's gonna fall off. Because it sees me. Hello.
Oh, I'm so glad you're
Me
here.
too.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Fun.
Going through Esther.
Yeah. I've been following.
Have you?
Oh yeah.
Oh, good.
Always. All the time you're on. I mean,
You and Landry.
There's your bride.
There she is. I kept trying to call you, but evidently Stella was answering the phone. Yeah. She didn't want to talk to her pawpaw.
She's playing a game.
Well, I don't know where everyone else is, but we'll go ahead and start. So I've got everything on the screen as far as the Bible, and then some. These are commentary notes at the bottom, and they're pretty good. We're going to go through the story of Esther. So you may recall that when we went through Ezra, we stumbled kind of into a very short, it's like 2 or 3 verses long, that talks about the reign of Xerxes the First. It's not a very long passage of scripture in Ezra. It actually falls, if you wanted to place Ezra in the timeline, it falls between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Ezra. And he is kind of sandwiched between Darius the First and Artaxerxes, who was the next important ruler of Persia. So in that very short reference in Ezra, we find a period of about 26 years that Persia.
It was that long?
It was that long.
I didn't think he was a king that long.
I didn't either till I started looking at everything. I even went back. Excuse me. That popcorn's right there. I went back and looked at some notes from my seminary class, and he was. Well, let's see. I might be able to find it, just to so I don't give the wrong dates.
I believe you. 'Cause I didn't think that.
Well, he
It was that long.
he ruled from 486 to 465, so actually 21 years is how long that he ruled. So in comparison to the other Persian kings, he was very short. But we'll find in a minute the time between when he tells Vashti that she's got to go till he finds a new queen is 4 years. It takes him a long time. Hey, Patsy, shut that door, please. So the timeline doesn't really come through in anything that we look at. It doesn't come through in Ezra, and certainly the writer of Esther wasn't interested in the length of time. There's I think there's 3 occasions, if I'm remembering, in the whole story where it references how long that he's been king, to kind of give some sense of time. So, but anyway, that's just part of the story. It's the drama that we're going to address in Esther does not stretch out over that 21 years by any means, and we're not given any indication as to how long Esther remains queen, but we can pretty much take the generalization that she remained queen as long as he was king. So it would have been about maybe 14 or 15 years that she served as the queen. So that kind of gives an overview. The other thing that I mentioned the last time was that there's a series of feasts that occurs and banquets that occurs throughout the writing, and they work in a chiastic form to help us do some contrast and comparisons of what's happening throughout the whole timeline of the story. So as we move through those, I'll more than likely just point out some things that we will look at in a contrasting nature, and you'll be able to pick up, if you're familiar with the entire story, you'll be able to pick up early on some of the contrasting ideas and contrasting behaviors and results that are happening as we move through. This was a style of writing that Old Testament writers used to draw really a great distinction so that you could see, especially in this writing, where God's name is never mentioned, where he's never referenced in any way as being in control. The narrator doesn't let us in on any clues that God is there. But as we see these things unfolding and the contrasting nature of it, we can begin to see that there's absolutely no coincidences occurring here, that this is God's hand at work. So you'll see in that first line, if you got your Bible, Ahasuerus is the name of the king. That would be either a Aramaic form of the name Xerxes. Xerxes is definitely the Persian name. So, but this is just a different form of his name that's used. So it says, now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. So you'll remember when we were looking into at 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Samuel, it would talk about Israel stretching from Dan to Beersheba. That was often the two words, the doublets that were used to describe. It was meant to get a picture of just how vast the kingdom was. Well, that's what this does. From India to Ethiopia is what? All the way from India, you got to go across. From here, you would have to go across Iran, Pakistan, India, and then the other direction you would have, of course, present-day Iraq, which is where this was, and then across the Levant, which is the Middle East, and then all the way down into Ethiopia, which is south and west of Egypt itself. So what they're describing here is a very grand patch of land that he's king over. This is the first time in biblical writing where such a vast kingdom has ever even been described for us. So it's a huge place, 127 provinces, which means that he had 127 satraps or governors or rulers over these 127 that answered directly back to King Xerxes, which I'm going to call him Xerxes instead of his name that's here, because I don't like saying this one. It tongue-ties me every time. So it says that he had these 127 provinces. In those days, when King Xerxes sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign. Okay, so Susa, there were some major cities in Babylon or in Persia. One would have been Babylon. The other one would have been Susa, and now I forget the name of the other one. Anyway, not as important as Babylon and Susa was. But this was the winter home where they would stay during the winter. And the reason why is because in the summer it was unbearable. It was just so hot in Susa. So, but they would all gather here in the wintertime. So you may remember in the New Testament, Herod had a summer home in Caesarea Philippi. It was up on the mountains and it was cooler. And then they spent the winter in Jerusalem, where it was more pleasant there in the wintertime. So these rulers had these places that they kind of retreated off to. But this was the citadel. This was a major fortified city, And so now we're in the third year of his reign. So he only ruled for 21 years. And we're down to year 17 or 18 here. And he gave a feast. So this is the first feast. For all his officials and servants. And this is significant. Okay, the army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces went before him. Okay, so let's just look at the whole historical thing that's going on here. This is right before Xerxes decided he was going to try to attack and take Greece. So the other major world power was Greece at this time. So if you've ever watched the movie 300, or you know about the Spartans, they became world famous because, in history, and because the legend is that 300 Spartans were able to hold a pass that fought off the entire Persian army. And so this is before that, really about 3 years, maybe 2 years before he actually made a move on Greece. So this feast that is going on, he's got the army of Persia and Media there, the nobles and governors, and the provinces were before him. He is building support for an attack against Greece. All right? And so he's doing that, and when he does this, it's a chance to show off. He wants to show just how fantastically rich he is. So he's doing this in verse 4, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days. All right, 180 days. All right, this is a 6-month-long party where Xerxes is just showing off all his stuff and spouting about his big plans. Now, did everybody stay for 180 days? No. That you couldn't run a country and have everybody there for 180 days, and when we see, they're all drunk. So what it is that this courtship that he is under, trying to build support amongst his own leaders and his own military to attack Greece, this thing is extended out over 180 days, or it is symbolic of a very extended period of time that he underwent trying to build this support. And so it says in verse 5, and when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel. If you see Susa, it always says the citadel, to remind you that this is a well-fortified place. It says, all the people present in the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So for 180 days, he has this party for all this royalty and all these important people. Okay, then at the end of that, for 7 days, he opens up his house to all the common people. All the people that have put up with all these visitors for the last however long that he's had this party, 180 days according to the text. And so now he's given them a big party, just thanking them for being such good citizens. All right. Then it goes and describes some of the opulence that is in this palace and in the garden. There were white cotton curtains. Cotton was a product of Egypt, and at this time, Egypt was really a vassal state of Persia. So this was most all the things that you see here are symbols of his conquest, or the conquest of Persia. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. So just kind of get your mind there for a minute. Here's these columns, and there's this floor, and the furniture, and it's all made of gold and silver and marble, and inlaid into the marble is this mother of pearl. All these precious stones are inlaid there. This is just, it's like the height of opulence. It says, so drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. All right, what that means is they didn't run out of wine. Okay? There was no way, because the bounty of the king, I mean, he was the most powerful person in the known world. So this is a way of saying that the wine just flowed and flowed and flowed. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion. What did he mean? Drink till you can't drink anymore. So here we have a king. Okay? He's a drunk. All right? This kind of sets the stage for what's coming. Because not only is he a drunk, and that he wants to be the host of all the drunks in the town, we begin to see that because of his love for drinking, the law has to be pretty much cut and dried, because we see in just a minute, he relies on the law to keep things in order. It's kind of ironic because he's drunk and he's kind of a malleable personality. He lets people tell him what to do. So he needs the law. He needs something that is there that is not going to change. And so we're going to see how this works for and against the situation. We also have the opportunities we move through this, that there's the law and then there's God's law. And we see both at work trying to control the will of the episode, so to speak, of the story. And we're not really sure about what God is up to because God's never mentioned. We're really left with reading between the lines when everything else is being shouted at us. Okay? But that's where we are. That's what we have to do. And because of the chiastic nature of the structure of the book, we'll discover that it's very easy to see once we've gone through the whole story. So reading this in bits and pieces gives us bits and pieces of the story that is interesting. But when we look at it from the 30,000 foot view and look at the whole thing, we really begin to see why Esther's in the Bible. So they were drinking, and for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Can you imagine? Okay. They never went home. They're going to do as each man's desires. So what does that mean? We don't know what that means, but whatever they wanted to do, they got to do.
They got to drink as long as they wanted.
They got to drink as long as they wanted to drink. Yeah.
But he was showing off.
Oh, he was showing
That
off.
was the whole thing.
Oh,
behind
yeah.
it was his, like it was mentioned, his glory. Okay. He was, saying, hey, look, I got so much, I can just
Could do this all day. It's like
all week.
yeah, over 180 days. Yeah.
Because the more that he provided for them, the more they liked him.
Yeah.
So he just didn't ever have to worry about getting into trouble because he was always the one
That's right.
everybody liked.
So there's this heightened arrogance. There's this unbelievable power. There's this ability to provide whatever a man wants. And you can just have whatever you desire. This guy is in control. I mean, he's got everything he wants right now. He's got his military on his side. He's got his royal leaders on his side. The people love him. At least the men love him. And we begin to see here, if you have any sensibilities about male chauvinism, you'll be totally crushed by the rest of this chapter. Okay, but that wasn't a problem in their day until a woman makes it a problem. And then we find he doesn't know what to do. And then we see it repeated again. Only that time he doesn't know what to do. So it says in that last verse 9, it says, Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to the king. So all of this is going on with the men, and they're carousing and rebel-rousing and all their stuff, and it's an Elks Club. You ever been to an Elks Club? No, they have them out west. That's what this is. It's kind of just a big drunken brawl. And so here she is, and she's given a feast for the women. We assume it's for the same length of time, but it's in the palace of the king. And so that's that. So there's these two things going on. One takes eight verses to speak of, and the last verse 9 just describes, oh yeah, the women had a party too. Okay, so on the 17th of the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, so he commanded Mehuman, and there's these names that I'm not even going to try. These are all eunuchs that serve the king. 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes. He commanded them to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princesses her beauty. All right, so he has shown off everything else that he has, and his thinking is, I've saved the best for last. I've saved my best possession for last. I'm going to bring out my queen. All right, which she might have been agreeable at some other time, but let's think about it like any woman would think about it. Are you going to go parade yourself in front of a bunch of drunken men? She's the most beautiful.
Also in the middle of a banquet.
She's in the middle of her own banquet.
Why
Yeah.
wouldn't he just leave?
Yeah.
I would have slapped him. No.
Good thing you weren't her.
But now who's king here?
Well, so we get to this. We get to this, and he wants to show her off. This is his royal possession. Wants her to bring her crown. He wants to show all the peoples her beauty, for she's this is the objectivity of it. For she's lovely to look at. Okay, this whole thing is a eye candy show for the king to show off his beautiful queen. The way that the Hebrew is written here is it also not only describes her beauty, but she's shapely. Okay, so there's more than beauty involved here. There's a sexual component to this. Okay, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. All right, you didn't refuse the king. Nobody refuses the king, especially his queen, or someone else in his harem, or in his concubine, or anyone that he has power and control over. You don't refuse them. So at this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned. Okay, when we've seen this that term before in Scripture, we understand what it means. You're just enraged. His anger burned. It's the kind of thing where if you tend to throw things, you're throwing things. If you tend to stomp your feet and curse, that's what he's doing. His anger burned. And he's drunk. Then the king said to the wise men, so he's got 7 eunuchs over here. They deliver the command to bring her to him. And that's what it is. They're just to go get her and show her off. And she refuses. So now he's got 7 wise men that are going to be involved in what should happen to her. So the king said to the wise men who knew the times, kind of like the men of Issachar that went and made David king. These are men that understand what's going on. They've got their ear to the ground, their finger on the pulse, however cliches you want to use to describe that. But they're in a position where they need to be able to know what's going on in the kingdom so they can give the king advice. So they were people that knew the times. And also, it says, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in the law and judgment. And then it gives the name of these men. So not only did they know what was going on, but they were lawyers. They understood the law that had been handed down or enacted. And they also understood the judgments that went with the law. So they were lawyers. and they also had a real keen sense as to what was going on in the kingdom. We know that they're important because after all of that, they're called the 7 princes of Persia and Medina. And they saw the king's face, meaning that they were able to stand before him with their faces upright. When everyone else had to drop their face before the king, they were able to look him in the eye. Okay, so they're very important. And they sat first in the kingdom, means that when an audience was brought before the king, they were always the first. So highly valued men, according to him. And so in verse 15 it says, according to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Xerxes delivered by the eunuchs? Okay, so what are we to do with her? This has never been done before. Is there a law to deal with this? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Xerxes. So, does he ever say that there's a law against what she did?
No, but they were afraid that all the women would take notice and rebel and
Right.
act the same way. So they were trying to make a law.
Yeah.
It's the thought of it. Somebody, particularly somebody in his family, okay, his household, disobeyed him. Okay? See, now this sets a precedent.
That's right.
If she can disobey him, then who else can disobey him?
Any woman
He can't let her get away with this legally.
So that's right. So now look what happens. This is great politics right here. The problem is an individual problem. All Vashti did was offend the king. But, Memucan comes and he says, no, it's much worse than that. When she offended you, she's made it possible for everyone, every man to be offended.
That's right.
Okay, so he doesn't have a law to say, oh, you have to do this, this, and this to her because she did this to you. He's had to enlarge the penalty, the offense, so that it will carry weight.
You don't want no women's lib movement starting up there.
That's right.
That's right. So
Every
this
man
is
could be told no by the women at that point.
so this is a manipulation. Okay, it's a manipulation by Memucan to have this thing to where I don't have a law, but let's make it worse than it is so that we can punish her. All right. This will give you flash forward views of Haman and what he does. See, so we start out in this little cosmic area where this one thing is done and it swells into an offense against all the men, and then we see Haman and Mordecai does this one thing that makes Haman feel like he's a clown and not respected, and it grows into a threat against the whole nation of Israel. So this is how the writer works. He gives us these microcosms to work in that ultimately reflect this grand thing that is happening in the story. And so we got to pay attention because this thing is growing. The underlying theme is growing as we move through, and we want to be able to see who's going to stop this, because we see what happens to Vashti right here. And so is the same thing going to happen to the children of Israel? Dun dun dun. We got to wait and see. So he says that Queen Vashti's done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the people who are in the provinces of the king. And why is it a problem for them? For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. Now, how does he know this?
Yeah.
What does it mean? You mean all women are going to rebel against their husbands because Vashti didn't want to show herself off to a drunken mob? Okay, so his logic doesn't make sense, but the king likes it because why? It's all he's got. That's all he's got. He's got to do something with her because she has offended him. Okay, so 17, for the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. Forget that she was having her own party, like Patsy pointed out, and did not want to be shown off kind of like a piece of meat before a bunch of drunk guys. All right. So this very day, the noble women of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, meaning all the people at her party, is maybe what they're referring to, will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. Okay, so let's think about this. He has spent 6 months courting his military and his officials and his princes and all these people to go to war against the Greeks. And in one afternoon, Vashti has destroyed, she could potentially destroy all of that if the women follow her example.
How much gold he has on his neck.
Yeah. So, so that's what's happened here.
Yeah.
All of his great laid plans, because she has shown a level of, really, she's the one that's shown a level of contempt. Okay, he is right about that, because she doesn't want to be treated in such a way and to have her guests treated in such a way that that demeans them. So he says, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed. Remember those lines, because it becomes significant later. That Vashti is never again to come before King Xerxes, banished from the court. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Doesn't this sound petty? If you get a picture in your mind, you see all these kind of like a bunch of clowns sitting around, and they get their feelings hurt, and so they're making up stuff as they go along that's going to kind of make them feel better. And put her in her place. All right. And so when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout his kingdom, for it is vast, again, we're reminding us of just how powerful this guy is. This is an important line here. All women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. So doing this not only creates punishment for Vashti where there is no law, but in some way he's led to believe that because of this, all women are going to all of a sudden give honor to their husbands. They're going to always do it. Yeah. Because to not do so may be seen as contempt, and then that would be a bad thing. But it doesn't give really a penalty.
So do they have children? Because doesn't her son succeed him?
Don't make me answer that right now. I don't remember. I don't remember them saying that they had children.
I know, but I thought in another part of the scripture it refers to her as Queen Mother or something, and that would be. I don't know.
I'll have to look it up. I don't remember that.
Well,
All I know is that
it seems like a pretty harsh penalty to me. Of course, she could have been beheaded or killed.
Yeah, so she's just
but
she's deposed. Yeah, she's been deposed from the court. And you got to remember too, this is the king didn't have a lack of women. There were probably 360 concubines in his harem. The tradition is there was a woman for every day. Okay, it's kind of weird to talk about it, but that's the way it was. So what he's doing here, as far as having women in his life, it really didn't matter. What he's doing is he's making a statement that nobody's more powerful than me. I'm the king of over this vast domain, and Vashti's behave as though she is more powerful than I by refusing me. So it's a power struggle thing that he has to deal with, and it's also an honor and shame thing. So when we look throughout this whole story, we begin to unfold the whole dynamic between honor and shame. And he was a man, you read these first 8 verses or 9 verses, and there's all this honor that's being piled upon the king, and then in one swoop, she brings shame upon him. And he just can't handle it. So this is what he decides to do. So he sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master of his own household and speak according to the language of his people. All right, so what was that about? So first of all, the decree says the man's the master of the house, and that's the end of it. So if he's the master of the house, now you don't have one set of rules for a woman to follow. You've got however many heads of households they are for the for women.
Already in place though.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't accomplish anything. It really doesn't.
Okay, tell me again after that.
Yeah, and the last part of that they speak according to the language of his people. If you recall, there's a lot of different nationalities living in together in this great vast empire that he has, and so they've intermarried. And he's wanting to make sure that the language of the house is the man's language, not the wife's language that may be of a different race or a different culture. Okay, so being able to declare in your own words what you wish had power to. And he's just trying to establish all of this through this edict. All right.
Judging from Abraham and Sarah, the women were mouthy back then.
You think?
Well, that's what we're mouthy today, right?
Yeah. David's wife, Michal, and the other one,
but I mean, the
Abigail.
culture was that a woman was to be silent in those days.
Yeah, they were property to be shown off.
Yeah,
you know.
for them to say, to have
Yeah.
to tell them that my words say.
Yeah. But we're going to see in this Esther story how the queen was going about to be chosen. She wasn't just looked at and somebody said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you're going to be... I mean, a lot went into this choice. And so it was naturally for the queen to have an opinion of herself where she is elevated and more than what you might normally think of property to be. And so I don't... There's nothing about Vashti that's out of line at all that I can find in this. Even in the culture... She still was holding her place as queen. She was still being a hostess at the same time that he was being a host. Everything was right until the point where she's got to enter into this banquet hall or wherever it is and be shown off like a possession.
Yeah.
And have it in front of people that they're already self-degrading by their drunkenness. Yeah, so what would she really be worth in the eyes of all this, because they're just a bunch of drunks.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's not the last time we see that problem for this king. I mean, he's got a problem. Not enough going on in his life, I guess. All right, so this word "after these things" in chapter 2, we're kind of moving along, and that's kind of the introduction of how all of this goes, and we've already pointed out some of the microcosm that's in there. Only Vashti's not, she's not triumphant in the story. She's banished. Okay? But then it says, after these things, which is always a signal in Hebrew narrative to start a new section, and there's something that is shifting. Okay? And the thing that connects this section to the previous section is when the anger of King Xerxes had abated. He remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. All right, so this is 4 years later. All right, so this is in the 7th year of his reign.
So he was missing her.
He held it for 4 years, the grudge.
He'd gone to Greece and got his butt whipped,
Yeah.
and now he's back home, and he's home, and he realizes, man, I've never done anything about this vacancy of the queen, and I need to do something about it.
And now we can't rescind it.
Yeah, you can't rescind it. Can't do anything about it. Because, yeah,
No.
yeah, that was one of the
What he
things.
did.
The king's edict cannot be rescinded.
Right.
Yeah. And this, and that was probably a rule for his own good, because he was so wishy-washy
Yeah.
and always under the influence of other people or something else, that there would have been no order in the kingdom, much less in his own life. And so these were the way he had to have these guardrails to keep him in place, and the law was supposed to be it. So verse 2, then the king's young men who had attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Here's the solution to your problem. Okay, if you
go for that one,
if you want a queen, there's two qualifications. They have to be beautiful and they have to be virgins. Okay, and then he says, so I don't know how you go about doing that, but this is how we're going to look for him. He says, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins. So beautiful young virgin, 3 qualities, to the harem in Susa the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. So if you recall, there was 7 eunuchs that served before the king. They had these harems, and they were in charge of, God, it sounds so terrible today, but they were to groom and to prep these women to hold audience with the king and whatever came from that. Okay, so remember these provinces. There's 127 of them. So he's got to have 127 officers that are going to go through every province, and according to their opinion, they're going to pick the beautiful young virgins that are living there and bring them all back to Susa. So this could be anywhere from hundreds to thousands of women. We don't really know. But they bring them back to the harem, and evidently Haggai he's probably the best at what he does in getting the women prepped for the king. So they further say, let their cosmetics be given to them. So dress them up.
Bring on the makeup.
Bring on the makeup, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. So they talk about Vashti like she's still
all this time.
well, she hasn't been queen. There has been no queen, but she's kind of still there.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's who we're referring to, so she's,
So-
how do you uncrown her?
Well, that's what he did.
He sent her away.
He
but
sent her away. She left the court. So she wasn't queen, but she's still Vashti. And she's somewhere in the midst of Susa. I guess maybe Susa or Babylon, one of the two. But anyway, the idea here is that there is no king, there is no queen, and Vashti needs to be replaced. So here we go. So in verse 5, so there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. All right. So Kish, anybody remember Saul's father's name was Kish? Okay, so here we have this bloodline of the Israelites, and then later when we see Haman, he's from the bloodline of Amaleks. Yeah, yeah. And so the Amaleks are the ones that opposed Israel in the desert. So now we got this battle setting up that's not just located in the contemporary setting of Esther, but this is an age-old battle that's going on that the writer is helping us see and understand here, because we have a hard time understanding just why there's this intense opposition to the Jews. Well, it could be because Haman, he comes from an ancestry that has always opposed the Jews. Could be that because Darius had allowed for them to return to their home and begun to build it back, that they were looked down upon as being, that they were being treated in a special way than the other people that had been brought there in exile. Whatever the reason, we'll see that it becomes a real problem. So he says there was a Jew named Mordecai, and gives this line, and it refers to had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away when Jeconiah was king of Judah. So this would have had to be Kish. It couldn't be Mordecai. He would be ancient if he was the one being referred to as being carried away. So it's talking about his great grandfather. Yeah. Because Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried him away. And then, of course, Persia conquered Babylon and gained all their stuff. So he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther. All right, so some discussion about the name Hadassah or Esther. There's a lot of discussion about the name. And it's pretty much believed that the word Hadassah refers to the tree, a myrtle tree here. And if you go look in Isaiah, there's a couple of passages that talk about that the thorn bush is going to be replaced with the myrtle tree. So for the writer and for even her parents that named her, there's this idea that Esther's already, her name reflects the idea that she is going to replace what is dry and ugly and harmful with what is good. And then Esther is just a Persian derivative of the same myrtle. You could read a long time about the uncertainty of what Esther means, but when you get right down to it, there's a work that was done in the 1940s by a guy that spent a good portion of his life just studying names in the Old Testament, and he determines that it's the same. It is the derivative of a Persian word that means myrtle. So it has symbolism, from Isaiah, replacing the thorn bush with the myrtle tree. So the daughter of his uncle. So Esther is Mordecai's niece. For she had neither father nor mother. So they had died, or for whatever reason, she was left, and he is left taking care of Esther. Here we have the young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. So the very qualities that they pointed out earlier, Esther has pointed out that she has the same thing. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So this was not uncommon, of course, in their culture, not uncommon in our culture. When family members die and leave their children, close family members will often take them in and raise them as their own. So Mordecai has an intense obligation of care and desire to care for and nurture Esther. It's not just because she's left as an orphan, but their family. And we're led to believe when we look at her name that she has great promise. Her name gives her great promise for something. And so he's caring for her deeply and really treats her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict was proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. So now, where is she? She's made herself to the palace, and she's under the care of Haggai. And the verbiage there kind of contrasts. Mordecai cared and nurtured for her. Haggai was more of a handler. Okay? It would be thinking of it like this. If you had racehorses, the trainer and the owner have this intense relationship with the horse, but the stable boy doesn't. And so that's kind of the way it was. And the young woman pleased him, meaning Haggai, and won his favor. So she's impressive even before she ever meets the king. She has an air about her, a flair, let's say. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So this is what he does. He sees her, recognizes that she's got a little wit and charm about her, and he says, all right, I'm going to quickly move you to the front of the line. She gets her cosmetics. She's evidently there's a diet that goes along with being prepared to be selected, possibly selected as a queen. And then there's 7 young women that are already in the palace, and they've kind of taken her under their wing too to prepare her for what's going on. So Haggai's got a real interest in her. Thinks that we're looking from the outside in, but we're reading his mind and thinking, yeah, this may be the one. So verse 10, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So why would he do that? The whole nation was filled with people of all races and cultures. So why would Mordecai fear of the king knowing who she was?
That's really, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question, huh?
Yeah, because he changes her name. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Why would he? I guess he feared because he didn't know how they would react.
Well, see, that's the thing that we're looking at is there already an anti-Semitism rising amongst the people that is saying that, oh yeah, they think there's something special because Darius treated them special, and so we're jealous. There's a jealousy that's involved that might possibly, Mordecai thought may have hurt.
And because she was so different, and he might have thought she wouldn't bow down when she needed to bow. Might become a problem because that was the reason.
Yes.
The guy didn't like him because he wouldn't bow to him.
So that's the
he
better
protected
answer,
her.
is that he's protecting her because it was probably known in a long history in captivity that the Hebrew people did not behave like everybody else.
Yeah.
They were different. And possibly if they found out that she was of Hebrew origin, that it could have actually gone badly for her.
Yeah.
Rather than just some neutral thing that could have happened. So,
Trying to save her from prejudice.
trying to save her from prejudice, and in a sense, saving her from herself because
Yeah.
she's Jewish.
Yeah.
Now we find later. So this is an interesting thing that we'll look at along the way. There's some moral vacillation that occurs in this, right? It could be that he could have said, "Go ahead, tell them you're a Jew, and they'll know what kind of person you are. They'll know how you practice your religion, and maybe they'll let you come home." That could have been that could have been an option. Okay, maybe you'll never have to deal with this pagan king.
No, you'll be
Maybe
labeled.
Yeah, so but we don't know.
You'll be labeled. You won't be taken as who you are, but who you are part of.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
See, now, when you label somebody, it decreases them. It
Right. So this is
you're not equal if you're labeled. You're somebody. Okay, you can. Well, like okay, if I were to say, well, you're just some southern hick. Okay, well, I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about my friend Mark. I'm talking about some southern hick.
yeah. I got that.
So now if she would have revealed herself, then she would have been that Jewish woman. She would have been that Hebrew.
Compare it to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When you compare the two, thinking, why isn't Mordecai behaving like Daniel? Saying, okay, I'm going to take my chances.
Different king.
Okay, different king, although
Different king.
Although they both sentenced people to death. I mean,
Yeah.
Daniel was sentenced to death by a king that really liked him. So I think what we have to confront here is that Mordecai is willing to take the chance that she could become the queen of a pagan king, that she would have relations with a pagan king. Let's just get right down to it. This is not what Ezra was teaching at the time.
Yeah.
See, we got these things. We've got this thing going on where
Well, you know, we were talking about Mordecai a couple of weeks ago, where it's one of those in between the line things that he himself is some kind of a prophet. Okay, he has some kind of communication with God, and God has a plan. All right. Now, I think this. I believe this in the story that he is some kind of a prophet, and that he is in communication with God, and God has a plan. Because in the end, this is to save His people.
but we have to read that into the story. That's not here. What we have here is that there's going to be a moral compromise that comes about in this for the good of God's people. And so is God willing, when He must, to work through our times of moral compromise in order to accomplish His good? Now, it's something we have to face in this story. And I think when we come out to the end of this, we will find that that's the case. And what is more important to God is that He fulfill His promises to His people. Now, we've seen that story already. We've seen that unfold with David. We've seen it unfold with other kings who failed, but God was intent on keeping His promises.
I think the
It is
story
a matter
relates
of
well
God's timing, too,
with the
because
story of
she-
Joseph as well.
Yeah.
Story of Joseph as well. There's
Because Joseph was put in a position through a lot of trial and suffering. He was put into a position where he was at the right place at the right time. Where I believe this is the same situation where you know, okay, she lost her parents, she was orphaned, she was taken on by Mordecai, her cousin. Almost adopted. You would say he would be her adopted father in this case, and so that he could take care of her, so that she would be able to be in this position.
it's definitely a matter of timing.
It's a matter of time.
And-
It's God's timing.
And when we get to the tail end of it, we do come to understand this had to be God's plan,
Yeah.
because it is working to fulfill His
That's
promises.
right.
So we don't know that that's going on in the midst of this until after we get to the Feast of Purim, and then we begin to see what is happening.
Joseph was in the well. We didn't know why he was in the well either. So
No.
I mean, it just
No.
you know, because when we look at things as curses, it may not be a curse. It may just be part of God's plan.
And some of what Joseph went through was to teach him a lesson. There's no lesson being taught here. This is God allowing for behaviors and norms outside what is normal according to His law and His ideal in order to preserve His people. So
I think Mordecai understood that.
I think Mordecai was willing for that
Yeah.
to be possible.
Yeah.
Because when Mordecai, well, we get to Mordecai here, he becomes very key early on, because Mordecai makes a name for himself that has nothing to do with any of this.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, and that allows a twist in the story that we could have never, ever anticipated when we get to the place where he exposes the
Right.
assassination attempt.
You
Yeah.
know, that's kind of like things are out of our control, so we have to
Yeah.
just pray and let God lead us.
We got to work
And
through
so
it.
Mordecai couldn't control Esther being taken hostage.
Yeah.
You know, so he just had to work within his realm of doing what God would have him to do.
Yeah. So we got this baby step
Yeah.
at the beginning that saves the king's life.
Yeah.
And then we have to take this giant leap later that is going to save the whole people's lives. So we got this, here we go again. We got this little microcosm that the writer uses to expand into this great story that God is unfolding for us, that we don't see until the very end. I love this, see, because it allows for us to experience God in a way that we don't normally experience Him. Not that God wants us to put ourselves in compromising positions, but as that happens, He doesn't give up. That's right. He doesn't just say, "Oh no." He's not like Xerxes. You break the law and you're out of here.
Yeah.
See, God doesn't work like men work, and that's a comfort. Anyway, verse 10. Esther had not made her people or kindred known, for Mordecai commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So, we don't know how many people may have done this, but Mordecai was doing it every day.
It's not like he washed his hands all the
He was a
time.
good father.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was wanting to guarantee that she was cared for and was in no kind of harm. So he is concerned about the possibility. So he's engaged in the care of his niece. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go to King Xerxes, after being 12 months under the regulation for the women. So she gets into this thing with Haggai, and for 12 months she's being prepared for beautification, since this was the regular period for their beautifying. All right? So it doesn't take Patsy 5 minutes. I don't know what the deal is taking 12 months. So this is the regular period. Every woman that was brought into the court or as a concubine or anything had to go through this 12-month period. And it says 6 months of oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. So I guess for 6 months you get rubbed down with oil every day, and your skin gets really soft and pliable. And then for 6 months you do things that make you smell better. I don't know, but this was a long time. 6 months, and then 6 months again. It says this, and so when the young woman went into the king in this way, and when she went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So this is what would happen. She could take something that in some way would cause the king to think more of her, even beyond her beauty. That there was some kind of gift, some kind of trinket, some kind of something that might possibly have him say, "Oh, that's the one." Okay. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of this guy, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. So they would go in, spend the night with the king, and then leave and go to a different group of women. All right, so let your imagination be what it is. Concubines had a purpose. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. All right, so get this picture. It's a terrible picture, but he'd bring them. These were all young virgins. He'd have spend the night with them, probably had sex, turn them into the concubine harem, and they may not ever be called on again for the rest of their life. Here they are in this harem. Kind of crazy, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Crazy way to run anything. So in 15, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go to the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. So we don't know if she took anything or what she took. But she left it to the guy who is really making her out to look really good. All right? So she's kind of political here in this place. Instead of trying to second guess what the king may desire before him as she comes, she's leaving it to Haggai. And she's built such a relationship with him that she's trusting that he is going to provide her with the best choice. All right. So she's really smart. She's not just beautiful and shapely, and now she's not just supple and smells good. She's got brains. Yeah. And she's kind of political in it. She knows how to handle herself with men. Even though he's a eunuch, he serves in the king's court and he knows what's going on. All right.
So she goes early.
Yeah, now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So not only is it Haggai that is impressed by her and he's done all he can to move her to the front of the line, it's all who saw her would have been women and men alike. She's become quite a striking character. And we'll see why that's important. So when Esther was taken to King Xerxes in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, it simply says the king loved Esther more than all the women. She won grace and favor in the sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So, what's missing here when we look at what was described earlier for the women and what's described here? She didn't spend the night. There's no, and then morning and the next day. She walks in, and immediately the king loved her. Okay? So she is not only radiant, but she mows him over emotionally. He's got nowhere to go when she's in the room. He's consumed by Esther. So that there's no need for all the nocturnal activity to convince him of anything. She walks into the room and the king loved her. The king loved Esther more than all the women. Okay? And she won grace and favor. That word grace there is the same root for hesed. That she won his unfailing love and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So this has been how long of a process? A 4-year process that all of this has finally come to play, and Persia has a queen. Then the king gave a great feast. Here's the feast again. For all his officials and servants, it was Esther's feast. So he granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. So this was his way of celebrating with all the land. There were those in Susa that got to celebrate at the feast, but the way everyone could celebrate is that he remitted the taxes for however long period that he decided to do it, where they didn't have to pay. Probably that year's taxes. Okay? So, and it was Esther's feast. So the shift now we're beginning to make is the first feast was whose feast? It was Xerxes' feast. Okay? And it did nothing but cause him problems. This feast is now centered on Esther. She is the solution to the problem. Okay? So she's her presence has offset everything that's happened before, and she's providing buoyancy to the king. What else is missing from this scene that was present in the first feast? A bunch of drinking. that's not part of the story anymore right here anyway. We find that the king is not even, he doesn't even have the compunction to be drunk in her presence. He wants to be swallowed up by her. Okay? This is important as we move through. She has been able, just by being who she is, beautiful and clever, and all the things, she's been able to change the king simply by that, and nothing else is mentioned here at all. So we're going to get to the end of this chapter, and then we'll stop, because here's another microcosm story that introduces the greater theme. So now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So we don't really know what the second part is. It's an odd juxtaposition between the first and the second. We know the first time, we're presuming that Esther is the first time, because she's been moved to the front of the line, and that's who he's been most impressed with and made her king. The second part, it's just kind of hard to understand what's going on. But anyway, there's a second group of these young girls gathered up. And Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So it's described him as being in front of the women's harem before, the court of the harem, but now he's in front of the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. So no one's asking, no need to know. The king is smitten. He's already crowned her, and it's obvious that this is the queen, so there's no need. There's no requirement here of it. So she had obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So she still has a loyalty to not only Mordecai, but as it turns out later, we will see, she has a great loyalty to her people. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, meaning the threshold of the gate, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Xerxes, meaning that they intended to kill him. That's just a euphemism. It doesn't say why they became angry. It would, if you wanted to read between the lines, as some commentators do, they look at the names of these two and they kind of figure out, oh, that's a Jewish princess there that's been made king, and they're angry about it. Okay, but that's never stated. But the reason why is because of their names are Amalek names, and also because Mordecai is the one that foils their plans. So it's just something to think about. It's not stated anywhere as to why they were angry. That's just conjecture, but it's good conjecture. Could very well be that reason. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther. So this is the first time she's called Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. So she doesn't pretend that she in some sort of way has gained this on her own. She's giving credit where credit is due. And when the affair was investigated and found it to be so, they were both hanged in the gallows. And it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So now we have a Jewish princess that has been made queen in Xerxes' court, and then an assassination attempt that was made against the king has been thwarted by her Jewish cousin and her in conjunction together to make sure that the king is safe. So now there's this it's developing this inner circle. The story is developing an inner circle around the king. Who can he really trust? Okay? It wasn't these two guys that had served in his court. It was now this brand new queen and her cousin that has created the greatest sense of safety and well, safety is a good word. But that's what she's done here. And as we move through the rest of the story, we see that although the king doesn't always know what's going on, she's able to provide this particular protection for him. And as the story goes on, the people are threatened, and they don't particularly understand why. Why are they doing this? Why? We've lived here amongst these people all our lives. They don't understand. And Queen Esther is able to come around them and provide them protection. So the story keeps repeating itself in various ways. And as we move through that, we'll see the contrasting ideas that happen between Haman and Mordecai, and the king and the law, and the way that he gets hemmed into bad decisions. And he's always looking for somebody to get him out of his own trouble. And ultimately God does, as we will see. Any comments? Questions?
Well, I like the whole thing about him sitting at the king's gate. Okay, I always understood what was the thing about sitting at the gate, so you knew what was going on. Okay,
Right.
so you would stand at the gate so you could see what was coming in to the. Well, like if you sat at the gate of Jerusalem, you would see what was coming in, so you understood the market.
Right. That's right.
Okay, so now Mordecai he's an individual who doesn't want anything to get by him. He wants to be on top of things. Okay. So now the king's oblivious to most of what's going around him. Okay. He only knows what's being told to him.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Now Mordecai, he's out there and he's seeing things firsthand.
The other thing the text does for us, it repeats what Mordecai had already commanded Esther to do. And so in that repetition we find, just like Haggai's name is repeated 3 or 4 times in regards to Esther being elevated amongst the others, Mordecai's the commandment is saying that Esther's being cared for. She's being watched over. So we don't forget in the story that it's just like you're saying, Mordecai's always there. He's always in the story. And even when he's kind of wanting to stay in the shadows, he gets pulled into the middle of the story. And so that it helps us remember, well, the whole thing begins to work like there's too many coincidences. By the time we get to chapter 5, it's like, where are all these coincidences coming from? And they all have to do with Mordecai in a lot of ways. And so the idea that, Mordecai knew, well, what we do know is that God is kind of moving Mordecai around on the chessboard to get some things done, even get some things rolling that were necessary. The one thing that we will get to when we look at it is that the threat against the nation was necessary to deal with the threat. You had to draw the threat out into the open so that you could deal with it. Like in the army, if you know you're going into a place where you're going to draw fire, the first vehicle to go is an armored vehicle. It draws the fire so you know where to shoot. Okay, so this is kind of the same way. God is drawing out the threat so that he can deal with the threat. And not only deal with it, but elevate his people at the same time. And that's fun. It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch him do this. and try to, and of course we're on the outside looking in. We get to see the hand of God, and it's important if we can to try to get on the inside of the story and not do that, because we discover a lot of things about why this story is so important. So we'll do it again next week and carry on to chapter 3. And as we work toward the end of it, I'm going to provide a diagram of how all these various things work in a chiastic nature, and the comparisons and the contractions that are happening, so we can see them more clearly.
You ever seen my artistic depiction of Esther? This is my Esther.
Oh yeah, when you had your show, I remember.
That is very cool.
It was one of the only pieces that I sold. I sold it for charity.
Oh really?
Yeah, I sold it for the art for the art supplies for the kids over at Luke 1027.
Oh yeah.
But I got like 8